Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics! Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. So glad you were able to drop in for this epic elaboration of Final Feats. So, super slaughter your way to that dastardly desktop for a fantastical finale you've been dying to hear. Not All Heroes Wear Capes, Volume 6, The Revelation.
Eidolon blinked through the shadows as I ran up the staircase behind her. The area beyond the meeting room where we had fought the puppeteer's army of the undead was pretty extravagant, obviously to show off to any potential business partners. The floor was laid out with a beautiful, blood-red carpet with gold trim. The walls were lined with fancy artwork from various artists, both paintings and statues, and the banisters at the sides of the staircase were plated in bright, shining gold. We made our way up the stairs, leaving footprints of coagulated gore on the carpet beneath our feet as we moved. At the top of the stairs was a landing with a balcony overlooking the floor below on either side of the room, with doors that led back into the balcony of the conference room. There were also statues and paintings adorning the balcony here, but at the center of the room, at the top of the staircase of where we had come, was a glass elevator to take us to the top floor of the building, and outside we could see the night lights of the city spanning into the distance, ending at the darkness of the forest beyond. It was beautiful and peaceful seeing it from up here. No hint at any chaos caused by the man we were here to see. It offered us a small bit of respite before our final confrontation with the handyman. We stared out at the beautiful lights for a short moment before the elevator dinged and we were at the top floor of the building. The doors opened to a room with large windows on nearly every side, offering a view of the city from every angle. The glow of fluorescent bulbs overhead brightly lit the room, along with the glow shining from the base of the windows emanating from the spotlights situated at the corners of the building a few floors below, to light up the building's, in layman's terms, sign, which could be found right beneath this room's windows. The floor was bright, shining marble, and there were matching pillars that stood near each corner, along with 4 more closer to the center of the large room. This place, too, was lined with artwork, though the style here was much more modern, unlike the classic style in the room below. And at the room's center, toward the far back window, was a white, wooden desk that was situated just beyond the central pillars of the room, allowing you to see the desk set symmetrically between them. At the desk, facing away from us and staring out of the window at the night sky, was the man in the cream-colored suit, the handyman himself, Layman Brown. "Welcome to my office," he said as his chair spun around to allow him to face us. He had very broad shoulders that filled his cream-colored two-piece suit. A white shirt and a blue-colored tie were tucked beneath the button-up vest of his jacket. His eyes were bright blue, and he had a bald head, his eyebrows a dark color, arched snidely as he looked upon us, and a smile came across his wide mouth. He set his hands upon the table, one of them pale, white like his skin, and the other a cold, gray metal that appeared almost like that of a suit of medieval armor, and upon the ring finger of his metal prosthetic was a ring that appeared to be made out of silver, and as we got closer to him, I could eventually make out a symbol of some kind that was etched into the light, blue-colored stone that was set into the silver ring with claw-like clasps around its edges. The symbol etched into the stone was like some kind of sigil. It looked old and valuable. "That's far enough," Mr. Brown said as several armed guards stepped out from behind the pillars of the room and from the blind spots at the elevator's edges. "Where's my daughter?" I asked him angeredly. "She's right here," Lehman Brown said, motioning for one of his lackeys to bring over my daughter. He gently pushed her forward, but that was enough to get my blood boiling. I was going to enjoy killing that motherfucker. Don't do anything stupid. We wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen, would we? Mr. Brown insinuated, causing me to back down. That's good. So, I propose we make a deal. You work for me, and I allow you to live. The handyman offered as he detached his metallic hand, only to replace it with another hand. This one had a cylinder on the end that contained fuel which ignited to light the cigar that Mr. Lehman Brown had in his mouth. But he didn't simply use the function's ability to light his cigar. He also showed off the true range of his hand's skill simply by turning his wrist. The flame grew larger, turning it into a flamethrower of sorts before he twisted his wrist back to the original position to allow the flames to die back down to a mere candlelight, which the handyman simply snuffed out with a gust of air from between his lips. "Is that why they call you the handyman?" Eidolon asked. "People give you a hand and you give them a hand?" She then asked, before pausing for a moment to end her sentence. "Or is it because of, the hand?" She joked. "You joke now, but you try my patience, young lady," Mr. Brown told her, replacing his hand once more with the original hand with the ring on the finger and commanding a servant to bring him a chest on wheels. The man appeared to be a butler and did exactly as he commanded, wheeling the ornate red chest with gold trim over to Mr. Lehman Brown and opening it for him so that he could return the flamethrower hand to its place as he puffed away at his cigar. The chest was filled with shelves that contained all manner of various hands, a spiked mace, a knife, a claw, a flail, hammer, gun, a large hook, a more human-looking hand covered with silicone skin, and even more unique prosthetics, including a hand that looked similarly to the one he currently wore, only this one was made completely of gold. There was also a 3-foot-long sword, a leather whip, and even the prosthetic equivalent to a Swiss Army knife where each finger was a different tool, and these were only a few of the hands that I was able to spot inside the chest. "Come on, tell us. What happened to your hand? I'm dying to know. Was it sharks?" "I bet it was sharks." She joked some more, which made me give her a look to stop what she was doing before he decided to kill all of us. "Well, you'll be dying soon enough. But if you really must know, young lady, this..." He paused, holding his left arm, the one with the prosthetic hand. "This happened when I found this ring here. You see, I paid a lot of money for this ring. A lot of money. And I wanted to wear it, so I put it on, and just like that." He paused once more before removing his hand again to reveal the skin beneath. It it appeared to be melted and fused in upon itself, as if his flesh and bone had just melted away. My hand began to burn, and then I watched as my fingers liquefied in the most painful display I've ever felt. I fell unconscious from the shock, and when I came to, my hand was gone, and my wound had healed in the way that you see before you. He finished before returning his prosthetic to his wounded arm and commanding his servant to take the chest of hands away. The servant did not move quickly enough for Mr. Lehman Brown, and that was all it took to get on the nerves of the madman in the seat of power. "When I say move, you move. Got it?" the handyman commanded his employee. "Yes, sorry, sir," the butler apologized. "That's not good enough. Come here," Mr. Lehman Brown said, commanding the man to wheel the chest back over to him. The man turned the chest back around and wheeled it a few yards back to the handyman. "When I say move, you move. When I say stop, you stop. Got it? Don't embarrass me in front of my guests," Mr. Brown said to his butler. "Yes, I'm sorry, sir. Is there anything else you need, sir?" the butler asked. "Yeah, open the chest back up," the handyman said with a smile, and the butler did as he was commanded, where Mr. Brown paused for a moment and looked over his collection of instruments of destruction, leaving both Eidolon and myself wondering what he was going to do. The handyman once again removed his hand and reached into the chest to receive the mace hand that I had caught a glimpse of previously. Mr. Brown then twisted the prosthetic onto his melted arm, turned to his butler, and motioned for him to come closer to his boss. "Don't watch this, honey," the handyman said to my daughter before immediately turning back to his butler and backhanding him across the face with the mace with a sickening crunch as he caved in the side of the man's skull. He then proceeded to bludgeon the poor man repeatedly with the spiked sphere, which became quickly covered with bits of skull and brain matter as the man was beaten to death before our eyes. My daughter screamed in fear and shock, and I removed my glove in an attempt to come to her aid, but I was quickly reminded of the situation when all the guards raised their guns to take aim at me in response. "It'll be all right, baby," was all I was able to say to my little girl as I looked on helplessly, promising her something I feared I would not be able to hold true to. It's so hard to find good help these days. Now, where was I? Mr. Lehman Brown stopped to remember his train of thought as he wiped down his mace with a white handkerchief. "Oh yeah, this damn ring took my hand, but it did give me other abilities," he continued. How did that ring take your hand?" I asked him with a grumble, kinda confused and pissed off, turning from a loving gaze toward my daughter to a hateful and rage-filled glare at the handyman. This ring, unfortunately, was not entirely meant for me, so it had disastrous consequences. You see, this ring, this very ring, is the seal of Solomon. It was used by King Solomon himself to control and cast away evil spirits. This ring is the very artifact that King Solomon used to banish demons, but, as you've seen, it can also unleash them, if the wearer is not entirely up to the task. Lehman Brown paused once more before finishing wiping down his mace and returning it to the chest of hands, and once more twisting the armored hand on again. I, unfortunately, was not entirely up to the task. "But that doesn't mean I can't use it at all," he said with a smile. It was then that Eidolon jumped into action with the plan she had. What I didn't know is that her jokes at the handyman's expense were to buy her enough time to use the shadow under the handyman's desk to take action and grab hold of my daughter to blink her out of the room and out of harm's way, which caused Mr. Brown to command the guards to fire upon us. Eidolon quickly reacted by slingshotting out a light overhead and shielding us with a solid mass of darkness, like a dome around us that would slow the bullets down enough that when they hit us, it felt as though we were being shot by pellet guns. It still hurt quite a bit, but it wasn't anywhere near fatal. When the guards all stopped to reload, Eidolon let out a burst of dark energy, breaking the force field around us and rumbling through the office to knock the guards off their feet and shatter the windows of the room, sending glass raining down into the streets below. Some of the guards climbed to their feet to be quickly brought back down by Eidolon's arms of shadow. I took this moment to charge ahead toward the handyman. He simply raised his prosthetic arm and flicked his wrist. As this motion happened, I stopped mid-lunge and fell to the floor with a loud thud. I grabbed about at different parts of my body in excruciating pain as I felt as if my blood was boiling, like the heat was traveling all over my body, burning me away from the inside out in various places across my extremities and into my core. What you're feeling is the demon inside of you, fleeing throughout your body. Its pain is your pain, and I control that pain. The handyman said calmly. Please, stop, I begged him as I began to see flashes of what could only be described as hell. People in eternal torture, burning, suffering, being cut, beaten, and wounded. My mind felt as though it was collapsing in upon itself as my body burned intensely, pain racing across my being from top to bottom, never staying in one place long enough for me to feel any kind of tolerance to the suffering. Then I heard the screaming of a girl in anguish, and I looked back to see Eidolon in much of the same shape I was in, both of us writhing excruciatingly upon the marble floor, our eyes filling with tears as the searing pain burned away our insides, and the images of torment filled our minds with centuries of suffering and abuse, all at once, causing us to both feel as if our brains were going to flatten and implode in upon themselves. Then it all stopped, and the two of us fell limp upon the white marble floor, breathing heavily as the remaining jolts of pain began to subside beneath our flesh, and the images of anguish faded from our eyes, but were left seared into our aching brains. So that's your power. Your demon, I managed to say, almost out of breath from fighting off the burning inside of me. Oh, no, not at all. I have no demons in me. None like yours, anyway. My demons are a more internal variety, so to speak. I have no power like you, or her, or any of those you've gone up against. No, I was not gifted with such an ability. I am simply a man with a ring, he informed me. So, this ring is what gives you your power, and us ours, I spoke, still holding my aching stomach and chest. The guards had by this time regained their composure and climbed to their feet to detain us both. This is your last chance, sir. Join me in my quest to remake the world, or perish now. The handyman spoke. You don't get it. Let me spell it out for you in a way that a layman would understand. Fuck you, I told him as I reached out to grab the leg of the guard that had pushed my daughter, who then began firing his assault rifle through the air in an arc toward his own head, taking out the other guard holding me and nearly shooting me in the process as well, before the gun finally fired off a fatal shot to his own head, spraying his brain matter all over me and staining the white marble floor and one of the pillars in a crimson hue. The other guards panicked and began firing at me, but I was able to scramble over Layman's desk, knocking him over in his chair and, in the process, allowing me to fall on top of him, where I knocked the cigar out of his smug mouth before the two of us began to struggle for the ring. Eidolon took this moment to fling the guards off of her with a burst of shadowy energy, sending them flying into the pillars with a loud crunch, while another man was flung clear from the building, sending him plummeting to the streets below. As Layman and I struggled, the room was further filled with blood and viscera as Eidolon's darkness literally ripped people to shreds. Arms and legs flew over the desk and landed beside Mr. Brown and I. Blood flew through the air and showered down upon us as we struggled against each other. Screams filled the air with the irony smell of blood. But there was no more Mrs. Nice Girl for Eidolon. She was almost as pissed off as I was. Layman Brown was no weak opponent. He was stronger than anyone I had ever fought, hand to hand. This guy was built like a brick shithouse, and he had the know-how to throw his weight around. He was able to give me a few solid punches to the face, breaking my nose in the process and covering his own face with a shower of my blood and snot as my nose gushed all over him. I was able to land a few back at him, probably shattering his left eye socket and cheekbone with a loud crunch. I attempted to grip his face with my death hand, but he stopped it every time I tried, blocking my hand or grabbing my wrist. And I stopped him every time he tried to free himself from my grasp upon his prosthetic, preventing him from sending the demon inside of me fleeing in pain. After what felt like a lifetime, I could feel my muscles begin to wear down and weaken, but not before I was able to push out one last burst of adrenaline, which was enough for me to grip the prosthetic and twist it off of his arm with a loud snap. The handyman yelled in dismay as I turned and tossed the arm away from us, where it went tumbling across the marble floor with a clang rattle before slipping over the edge and out of one of the broken windows, leaving Mr. Layman Brown completely vulnerable. And before he could say one more word, I reacted, lunging my hand forward with great speed to grip him tightly around the throat with my darkened hand. His eyes widened to the point where they bulged out of his head and began to turn red as I cut the oxygen off from his throat. I didn't let my power do its work with this one. This one was all me. I gripped his neck tighter, digging my fingers into his flesh, causing the blood to leak out around them. The man struggled against me, attempted to free himself, gasping for air and punching against my arms and clawing at my face with one arm. The stub of the other arm flailed about and tried to punch me with a fist that wasn't there. But soon, his attempts to free himself turned to attempts to claw away from his own face and eyes with his fingernails as he tried to end his own life before I could do the deed. He gouged out one of his eyes, popping it like a disgusting zit in his face, causing some of the clear liquid to mix with the blood and leak from a now mostly empty socket, leaving a flattened eye sac as the fluids within the eye were squeezed from it. And it wasn't long after this that Mr. Layman Brown went from red to a purplish blue color before he finally stopped moving and fell entirely limp. And I could feel the life slip out of him while his pulse went from racing to nothing as his heart stopped beating and the blood pooled around the fingers that I dug into his neck. I sat there for quite some time over the handyman, my hand still gripping tightly around his lifeless throat. The entire room fell silent as Eidolon dispatched the last of the handyman's goons with a swift decapitation, her hands of darkness ripping the head, spine and all from the man's body, which then fell into a pool of blood on the floor before turning toward the desk where I was still strangling a corpse. Is it over? Eidolon asked me as she approached the desk, to find me still choking the lifeless corpse of the handyman, causing her to gasp and cover her mouth. I snapped back to reality and loosened my grip around his neck, removing my fingers from the holes they had made when they tore into his flesh, making a squishing, slurping sound as my fingers slipped out of the blood-filled holes. "Yeah, it's done," I answered her. "Where's my daughter?" I then asked, as my mind fully returned to me. "She's up on the roof," she began. "Don't worry, she's safe." "Where's the ring?" Eidolon then replied with a question. I think it fell out the window," I answered, in a bit of a stupor, still kind of in the shock of rage. "Shit, we gotta find it. You go get your daughter and I'll meet you on the street," Eidolon replied, blinking away down to the streets below. I quickly snatched up my glove from the blood-covered floor and donned it before finding a small stairwell near to the elevator and climbing the steps to the roof, where I found my little girl, curled up next to the stairs that led to the landing pad where a helicopter sat, waiting for an owner that would never come. We hugged, and I held her close, reminding her that everything was going to be okay. I told her that I was so sorry, that she was safe, that I would never let anything happen to her again, and that I would always protect her. It took a few moments, but I was finally able to calm her as I held her close. We were eventually able to climb to our feet, and the two of us fled out of the building to find Eidolon in hope that she was able to locate the ring. We didn't want it to be falling into the wrong hands again, but when we made it to the ground floor, there we found Eidolon, holding the handyman's prosthetic in her hands, a look of despair upon her face. "It's gone. The ring's gone," she informed me. And it was then that I knew, even though the immediate threat of the handyman was dead and gone, and I finally knew what the source of my power was, there was still a demon thriving inside of me, and there was more to come. Someone else had gotten a hold of the Seal of Solomon, and there was bound to be more disastrous problems to follow. But those were problems for another day, another time, after a much-needed vacation.
So, as you can see, one story's end may be another's beginning, and if this super scary sleuth can tell you anything, it's that there's sure to be leaps and bounds of more crime-fighting carnage to come. But don't vacation yourselves for too long. Make sure to drop back in for more of that fear you crave next weekend, and until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.